Welcome, everybody, to this week's Cyber Policy Center workshop. We are thrilled to have our colleagues from Kyoto University here, both Professor Hiroki Habuka and Tatsuhiko Inatani. We are particularly thrilled because we have been trying to broaden the geographic scope of the work that we're doing here in the Cyber Policy Center, and they were our wonderful hosts in Kyoto in May when Jeff Hancock and I went there to both to Korea and Japan to meet with different folks to talk about tech policy. I think we here in the Cyber Policy Center, like so many of the American academic centers that deal with tech, are overly focused on Europe, and that's for some obvious reasons, which is that the Europeans have been first movers on the regulatory front. But it's so important that we broaden the geographic aperture of the work that we do here, because what we learned when we did our sort of tour of Asia there and through continued interactions with our friends here is that there are really different approaches, right? That the discussions we had about AI in Japan were qualitatively different than the ones we have in Brussels and in other places. And so it's very important that we here in Silicon Valley generally get a sense of the diversity of approaches around the world. And so as with all of our presentations, they'll talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have a little conversation up here. Those of you on Zoom should put in your questions into the Q&A function, and we'll open it up for questions toward the end. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm especially happy because this is the exact classroom where I studied several years back. So today, I and Professor Inatani here will introduce Japan's approach to AI regulation and how this approach contributes to international rulemaking on AI. We will address the three topics. First, Japan's approach to AI regulation. Then we will overview the global state of rulemaking for AI. And then we will talk about social robots and their legal implications to explain how our legal systems could be interoperable. So let me start from Japan's approach to AI regulation. Japan has been actively promoting the implementation of AI in our society. While there are certainly economic motivations, but also there are unique factors beyond that. First, Japan is facing serious problems of an aging population and labor shortages, leading many to recognize that we need to leverage AI. Additionally, Japan has a robot-friendly culture. The idea of robots living with humans, not merely as tools, but also our friends, has long been a topic in animation or manga or so. So this culture may be rooted in Japan's ancient animistic beliefs, where spirits live not only human beings, but also in animals, trees, or even stones. So why not computers? So based on these mindsets, the core factors of our AI regulation or AI governance strategy are like this. Firstly, our goal is to optimize the advantages of AI while mitigating its risks to a level acceptable by society. So rather than attempting to eliminate all AI risks entirely, we acknowledge that some risks are unavoidable. And therefore, we focus on reducing the risks while maximizing the net social benefits. Secondly, we implement sector-specific regulations. So AI systems are highly complex, but simply speaking, what AI does is statistical analysis of given data to produce the most probable outcomes. So in other words, AI is a super efficient statistics and probability calculator. So, and the decisions based on statistics and probability have long been part of our human activities or our society. So why should AI be subject to special regulations just because AI can perform those tasks more efficiently and accurately than humans? We must ask this question when considering AI regulation. A simple answer may be that AI can pose high risks depending on its use cases. Then the next question goes, what constitutes the high-risk use cases of AI? The simple answer would be that high-risk AI involves activities that are already regulated, such as driving vehicles, medical diagnosis, or infrastructure maintenance, and so on. There is no controversy that regulations are necessary when AI is used to replace humans in these regulated activities. So for this reason, Japan applied sector-specific approaches to AI regulations. Then the question goes, are there any additional risks specific to AI that require additional regulation? This will be discussed later. And then, while Japan applies a sector-based approach, many aspects of AI regulations can be shared across sectors, given the common characteristics of AI systems. For example, how to ensure data quality or conduct safety testing of AI, or how to make sure its transparency are cross-sectoral issues. So these issues are provided under flexible standards or guidelines rather than in rigid legal forms to keep up with the evolving technological situations. And then, regarding large multimodal models like ChatGPT or Gemini or Anthropic Claude, there is growing recognition of new risks not present in traditional systems, and regulatory discussions are ongoing in the government. But so far, it seems likely that any regulation on those big models will be light touch rather than heavy-handed. And finally, Japan pursues an agile multi-stakeholder approach. With today's rapidly changing social and technological landscape, it is not realistic to establish uniform top-down rules. Instead, we aim to continuously update governance mechanisms based on feedback from stakeholders rather than aiming at perfection from the beginning. Finally, Japan seeks to contribute to global rulemaking through forums such as the G7 and the OECD. I will explain more details about it later. So then, more concretely, what kind of AI-related laws do we have? So let me begin with sector-specific regulations. Japan has implemented regulatory reforms to promote the use of AI in regulated sectors, which I call regulation for AI. For example, for autonomous driving, the revised Road Traffic Act and Road Transport Vehicle Act allow level for automated driving. In the finance sector, the Installment Sales Act permits credit card companies to determine credit amounts using data and AI instead of legislated formula. For infrastructure maintenance, the High Pressure Gas Safety Act allows certified operators to conduct safety inspections without interrupting operations for up to 80 years, instead of traditional requests for annual inspection. In the healthcare sector, discussions are underway to establish an early approval system for AI-based diagnostics software. In addition to these sector-based regulations, Japan is undertaking horizontal regulatory reform to eliminate so-called analog regulations. The Digital Ad Hoc Commission, now a part of the Digital Agency, has revised around 10,000, it's not 1,000, but 10,000 regulations, ordinances, and notifications requesting analog methods, including written documents, on-site inspections, periodic inspections, and full-time stationing. However, while these reforms clearly clarify that not everything needs to be done by humans, but they do not specify which AI systems can replace human roles. So considering the pace and complexity of technological environment or advancement, such decisions cannot be written in law, but rather should be standardized gradually through accumulating best practices for each use case. Yeah, and this is a brief explanation of amendment of Copyright Act in 2017. So now the law says that using copyright works without human enjoyment. So I mean, if you just use the data for machine training, then it does not constitute copyright infringement unless it unfairly harms the copyright holder's interests. So now there are a lot of discussions on what without human enjoyment means, or what does there unfairly harms the copyright holder's interest means, but the basic rules is that you can use the copyrighted contents for machine learning purposes without the permission by the copyright holder. So now I briefly outlined Japan's approach to AI regulation. Next, let's review the current global landscape for AI rulemaking. To help you understand the speed of policymaking on AI, I have listed major AI-related policies introduced since May of this year. So all of these happened in the past few months. I will not go into details today, but there are domestic regulations such as the EU AI Act and international agreements like the G7 Hiroshima AI process and the AI Treaty by the Council of Europe, as well as guidance and reports from leading international organizations such as the OECD and the UN. And you have this great book here, almost 500 pages, only describing governance of generative AI. So you may understand how crazy it is. I mean, the speed and value of policy making is just astonishing. So this fast and complex situation leaves policymakers, businesses, and all of us wondering how to keep up. So if you don't catch up with everything, don't worry, nobody can understand all. So there are so many rules worldwide, but to what extent different countries' policies are aligned? This table shows countries joining the G7, AI Treaty, AI Safety Summit, and the OECD and United Nations. As depicted in the center blue rectangle, the G7 is involved in all these important global initiatives. Moreover, the G7 nations, a group of democratic major powers, represents over 25% of world GDP. So this makes G7 agreements significantly influential globally. And this table shows the 12 principles for advanced AI systems agreed upon in the Hiroshima AI process. Since 12 is slightly a big number, I sorted them out into 3 groups. The first group concerns risk management, which means each actor should identify risks, mitigate them, and invest in security. The second group relates to trust building by AI actors by appropriately explaining to stakeholders and sharing information about incidents or their governance mechanisms. The third group addresses ethical and societal considerations, encouraging the AI actors to think beyond your immediate stakeholders to the broader society, such as to address pandemic risks or climate changes. And my research examined how well these 12 principles align with existing policies across G7 countries, including the European Union. I don't expect you to read this table in detail, but this crosswalk analysis indicates that the Hiroshima AA process 12 principles, which I showed in the previous slide, closely align with current policies in all G7 countries. And beyond that, now over 50 countries and regions have now expressed support for the spirit of the Hiroshima AI process. I mean, the meaning of spirit is not very clear, but at least 50 countries and regions say, yes, it's a good idea, and suggesting a good start toward harmonized international rulemaking. Then what are the commonalities in the G7 countries' approaches to AI regulation? First, while discussions often focus on hard law or soft law, I don't think that's a good right metric. All nations employ both hard laws and soft laws, at least in regulated sectors. The primary difference lies in the scope to which hard law applies. I will explain that in the next slide. The second, G7 countries share a risk-based and multi-layered approach. Risk-based approach means allocation of resources based on its actual risks. This applies to different layers of governance phases, such as legislation, monitoring, enforcement, and organizational management, which I call the multi-layered approach. For example, we could define a high-level framework in the law and provide more details through standards or guidance. However, these standards or guidance cannot cover every detail of appropriate action for all actors. Therefore, individual companies' governance and trust-building efforts remain essential. So this is a typical example of a risk-based and multi-layered approach. Also, all G7 members agree that an agile and multi-stakeholder approach is crucial, as emphasized in the 2023 G7 Digital Tech Ministers Statement. And actually, our team in Kyoto University contributed to drafting this concept. Another shared feature is double feedback cycles, which involve not only operational level feedback cycles for AI governance, but also management level feedback cycles for organizational structures and protocol formation. The same approach is reflected in Japan's AI guidelines, the left one, and the US NIST AI risk management framework, the center one, and also ISO's risk management framework, which is the right one. Then, conversely, what are the differences in the G7 countries' approaches? So one clear distinction is whether to adopt a comprehensive approach framework, a comprehensive regulatory framework for AI or sector-specific regulations. The EU's AI Act takes a comprehensive approach, and Canada is considering a similar one, but not yet legislated. On the other hand, Japan, the UK, and the US so far take the sector-specific approaches. A more fundamental difference lies in what constitutes high risk, which is unique to AI. As I mentioned earlier, all countries agree that AI should be regulated when it performs already regulated activities. However, the question arises whether activities that would not be regulated if performed by human beings should be regulated when they are done by AI. For instance, manipulating people's behavior to some extent, or conducting biometric identification, or recognizing emotion are not generally regulated if they were performed by human beings, while they could be considered high risk or even unacceptable under the EU AI Act. There are also differences in compliance methods. The EU AI Act mandates human oversight for high-risk AI systems, while other jurisdictions handle this on a case-by-case basis. And finally, there are certain distances among countries as to laws on privacy, intellectual property, or competition. So this was a brief introduction to the legal framework related to AI, both in Japan and worldwide. So in the next section, Tatsu will discuss why these differences arise and explore the potential for globally interoperable legal systems based on the case of cohabitation robot.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for your kind introduction, Nate and Habuka-san. So it is a great honor for me to be able to participate in this workshop today. So I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Cyber Politics Center for Stanford University for giving me this opportunity. So my talk is about social robots and their legal implications. Supported by the JST, one of the largest Japanese funding agencies, I am conducting this research as the principal investigator at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies of Law and Policy at Kyoto University. The Center is for interdisciplinary legal and policy research, and this project also involves researchers in law, robotics, cognitive science, and cultural anthropology from 4 universities. So, to explain what a social robot is, I'd like first to show you a short video. In this video, the robot called Nikobo mutually communicates with the users, and you can see the emotional bonds between the users and Nikobo. In this way, a robot whose functional purposes is not to achieve some specific goal, but rather the social interaction with the users itself. Let us call a social robot. So.
おはよう。おはよう。
いい天気だね。ニコボ。
伝えてこい。ママ。ご飯どうする？
せやな。
だよな。
意味ないよそれ。なんでそんなことするの？普通にしてる時の。
So, social robots, you see the cute robots actually. Social robots originated from a unique Japanese robot design concept, so-called a weak robot. A weak robot is a robot designed to be unable to achieve its functional objectives on its own. For example, a robot named Social Trash Can only moves around the trash unreliably and cannot clean up the garbage by itself. However, they are either so pathetic or so adorable that people come to help the robots clean up by putting trash into them. It is well known that once someone picks up trash, others will follow their lead. As a result, weak robots change people's cognition and behavior to be more altruistic. And in other words, by daring to design imperfectly, people's cognition and behavior are transformed into altruistic, resulting in a better form of social function, which is the design concept of a weak robot. The distance between here and the social robot is not that far. By mutually communicating with people and forming emotional bonds, social robot can transform people's cognition and behavior and improve the well-being of their users. That is the design concept of social robots. Japan today, in addition to the Nikobo introduced at the beginning of this talk, social robots such as Labot are also gaining popularity. It seems that the number of people who enjoy gathering with these robots and communicating with each other is increasing in our society. The design concept of social robot is also attracting attention from the perspective of forming a new digital platform for care. From the perspective of extending the healthy life expectancy of elderly people living alone due to the declining population, the maintenance of their cognitive function through the effective use of social robot is beginning to attract attention. Through communication with social robots, it may be possible to detect mental health problems such as depression at an early stage and intervene to improve people's well-being. By understanding the developmental characteristics of children through communication and providing appropriate support, it may be possible to develop the capabilities of children who are having difficulties with their studies at school. When considering cognitive and behavioral change, the strength of social robots lies in their ability to use emotional bond with users. Of course, there may be people who have emotional bonds with smartwatches too. But I think that the impact of emotional bonds with cute robots that share everyday life on people's cognitive and behavioral change cannot be ignored. Furthermore, since social robots are closely involved in people's daily lives, they make it possible to obtain data that would not normally be available. In fact, experiments have already confirmed that people can say things to robots that they cannot say to other people, human beings. By analyzing data obtained from close relationship in an appropriate manner, social robots have the potential to become even more effective. Social robots will also be able to provide more comprehensive support by being connected to smart homes and other devices. I personally believe that social robots have the potential to become a new digital platform for care. After listening to this far, I think some people may feel a sense of discomfort. There is always a shadow side to things. Social robots are no exception. For example, there is a risk that the personal data collected in large quantities by social robots will be inappropriately managed or abused. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to address this issue using the traditional methods of obtaining consent for privacy policies. This is because users are likely to consent to privacy policies out of a desire to see robots improve their performance or out of a fear that robots will malfunction. Therefore, it is thought that there will be a need to require organizations to establish systems, both within and outside the organization, that are tailored to the specific risks that may arise in relation to the management and use of data by law. Similarly, the characteristic of using emotional ties and being able to connect to smart homes could also be a problem. Intervention based on emotional ties may lead to undesirable cognitive and behavioral changes in unintended ways. It may also exacerbate the problems of regulating digital platform transactions, which involves forcing people to buy unnecessary products for the benefit of the company. In addition, for a way of thinking that places importance on concepts such as people's dignity and autonomy, as expressed in the EU AI Act, Article 5, it is possible to think that design that intentionally use emotional ties to transform people's perception and behavior is an acceptable form of manipulation. In fact, it seems that research has begun to more strictly regulate social robots based on this kind of thinking. In other words, social robots also have the aspect of being a departmental store of problems that arise many problems at once in the areas of AI, robot regulation, and more broadly, the field of cyber law. Our research team believes that in the potential of social robots. However, that is precisely why we think it is necessary to properly address issues such as the misuse and abuse of data and emotional ties. But unlike the EU AI Act, we do not believe that it is necessary to ban it entirely or treat it in an inherently hostile manner based on the concepts of dignity and autonomy. I think the real problem is that there is a lack of research into how and why interactions with social robots affect the cognition and the behaviors of users. What is needed to establish a system of governance that can specifically grasp the impact that social robots have on people and then use both law and technology in an integrated manner to appropriately control any risks that may arise. Social robots are exactly the kind of things that agile governance, Hiroki mentioned, the Japanese approach to controlling the risk of AI and robots is designed for. Therefore, our research team has adapted a structure in which cognitive scientists and cultural anthropologists empirically grasp the impact of social robots on users, and based on the results, legal scholars and robot engineers design laws and ethical norms. We have also been able to obtain the cooperation of a company that develops and operates social robots, and we plan to move on the phase of full-scale experiments and the design of legal and ethical norms. Today, I'd like to share some of the results of my tentative research. It is mainly based on the result of cognitive science and concerns legal issues. It is well known that there are two systems involved in human information processing. A fast and bottom-up system 1 relates to intuition and emotion, and a slower and top-down system 2 relates to deliberation, calculation, and logic. We found, through the experiments to explore how people perceive accidents caused by automated vehicles, that there is a prominent cultural differences between Japan and the UK. We conducted a joint online survey with Cardiff University in the UK to find out people's reaction to accident caused by automated driving system in various situations. What is interesting is, in the case where AV, autonomous vehicle, couldn't cooperate with human pedestrians or a manned vehicle, the UK people don't blame their autonomous vehicle or manufacturer, but Japanese people do. It may suggest that Japanese people do not make a difference between autonomous vehicle and humans as an agent based on a holistic and interdependent view of the world. Actually, these findings matches previous studies of cultural differences in people's system and cognition. Preliminary studies also show that only people living in so-called main cultural regions tend to distinguish between humans and non-humans strictly. In the main culture, it includes US, Canada, and so-called Western European countries. Emotions are intuitively understood and put into practice as originating from within oneself. Whereas in the outwards culture, except main culture region, emotions are intuitively understood and put into practice as existing within the relationship that surrounds human beings. This may show, again, alongside previous studies, that human perception is formed through social interactions with humans and non-humans. These research results have raised the question, could friendly or hostile attitude and ethical intuitions toward robots also be due to the cultural differences in brain functions? It is known that when people intuitively distinguish we and them, System 1 is activated. So our next target is to explore what happens in the people's brain during the interaction with social robots and what future may trigger the reactions that allow them to recognize social robots as we or them. If these studies progress smoothly and cultural differences in human-robot interactions are clarified from a cognitive neuroscience perspective, this may bring about a change in the trend of international discussions on the regulation of AI and robot. The human understanding and ethical intuition that emphasizes autonomy behind the EU AI Act Article 5 may be nothing more than a reflection of the characteristics of System 1 in a specific cultural sphere. It may be difficult to understand it as something universally applicable. The extraterritorial application or simply Brussels effect of the EU AI Act cannot be said to be a supply of global public goods, even from the perspective of international law theory. If this is the case, it seems necessary to consider an internationally acceptable legal framework using a method that differs from the EU AI Act. In short, it seems that, in addition to the technical problems that have already been pointed out, it is becoming empirically clear that the EU AI Act also has normative problems. So, how we can solve this problem? According to the cognitive science, there are different ways to employ System 2 when System 1 faces difficulties. The deontological approaches try to rationalize the intuitive decision of System 1, and the utilitarian approach tries to recalculate the intuitive decision of System 1. It is said that to bridge the gap between we and them, we should not rely heavily on the deontological approach, but should rely on the utilitarian approach. This is because ethical intuition itself has cultural differences that are difficult to resolve. So, no matter how much you try to rationalize it, the problem will not be solved, and the conflict will only intensify. Rather, it is preferable to have a methodology that allows for productive compromise with the aim of solving specific problems, even if everyone feels uncomfortable with their ethical intuition. It is well known that utilitarian solutions often conflict with ethical intuition, as in some cases of truly problems. But I think it is necessary to compromise while acknowledging discomfort caused by System 1 together. And it is for this productive compromise that agile governance should be used. By identifying and reducing specific risks, we can establish an agile governance system that allows us to pursue more flexible and desirable relationship between humans and robots. This will enable us to establish a legal framework that is more internationally acceptable, I think. But our research is still in early stages. We hope it will be some of use to you. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That gave us a lot to think about. And I want to start with the umbrella question about what really are the salient cultural differences, say, between Japan and either the US or the EU that would lead one to have different approaches to AI regulation. Now, you've gone over it here, I think, at a high level. And Hiroki, you sort of explained a little bit about some unique challenges that Japan faces. But if you had to identify, it's quite clear that in the US right now, there's a lot of alarm and concern, and that's true in Europe about the progress on AI. What is different in Japan? Why is it that we would point to cultural differences as affecting, say, the population's receptivity to AI technology and then regulation?
Okay, so thank you so much for excellent question. So my understanding, the cultural differences mostly appeared in the understanding of the human beings and the world, especially the relationship between them. So according to the previous studies, the Japanese people intuitively understand the world is more interdependent, and ourselves is very interdependent ones. It is actually based on our historical cultural backgrounds, for example, represented in the Zen, the Buddhist religion. In Buddhist religion, it is demonstrated that all human beings are, in essence, it is empty. So it is fulfilled with a relationship, or ourselves is a node of a relationship. So that is the Japanese understanding. And it reflects on the understanding of robots or non-human agent.
Right.
So because it is easier for us to understand they are parts of the agents of our society, which allows us to more friendly attitude toward these kind of things. But in Europe, from our understanding, it is more like the individualistic and analytical culture. So people try to understand that their emotions or thoughts originates from their inside. And so if the emotional ties influences their, how to say, by the robots, then they feel there's some violation of inner core of themselves. That is a huge difference, cultural difference between Japan and Europe, according to the previous cognitive science studies.
I think, when we went to Japan and we met with the digital minister, Taro Kono, Jeff and I was impressed. We came there expecting to give the same speech we always give, or at least that I always give on the dangers of AI, like here are the risks. And he's like, no. Tell me how this can benefit the Japanese population. I mean, that literally cut off, and he's like, tell me what the killer app is. And I was like, it was such a refreshing, sort of different kind of. Now, we have plenty of AI utopianists, here in Silicon Valley. There's no shortage of that. But for the most part, we're thinking about the use of law to regulate the downside risks of AI. And so, Hiroki, when you talked about the interaction between the thinking on AI and the Japanese population challenge, that was something that surprised me when we were in Japan. Every conversation we have, some talk of the low birth rate came up. And I was like, well, I'm here to talk about tech. And it's like, well, no, that's the way they're framing the tech discussion. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that sort of dovetails with the tech discussion?
Yeah, thank you. Let me add some comments on the
put the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth. Yeah.
Can you hear it? Yeah. So because our culture allows to have an emotional attachment to a computer and to machines or even things, our legal system can be more tech neutral. For example, manipulation of emotion is sometimes dangerous, but it's dangerous regardless of it is conducted by humans or machines. So likewise, surveillance is sometimes very risky, but it's risky not because it is performed by the AI, but risky because it lacks due process. So likewise, we are always trying to be tech neutral, or in other words, we don't discriminate humans and AIs in terms of the risk levels. Of course, how to regulate would be different from AIs and humans. It's ridiculous to ask AIs to take the same exam as we take for the driving license. So the approaches should be different, but at least the scope of high risks, or the scope of the risks that needs regulation would be not so different from AIs and humans. And that is a legal mindset.
Those of you who are on Zoom, please put any questions in the Q&A, and if you have questions inside the room, please raise your hand. Let's talk about what you see as the future of regulation here. Even if it's a kind of facilitative approach, I mean, I understood your presentation, and for that matter, the huge contributions that he made to this massive volume that we'll talk about at the end gives us some of the flavor from Japan. Look, everybody is worried about risks here. It's true in Japan as elsewhere, but maybe the legal perspective in terms of how you're going to deal with risk is different. If you had to identify like what the next stage of regulation looks like in Japan, and how it differs from Europe. I mean, I think that with Europe, we don't even really know how the AI Act is going to be implemented and what the kind of dialogue with the companies is going to be. But from the Japanese side of things, you talked about sector-specific regulation as well as the application of existing laws. Well, what about, the thing everybody's afraid of, these LLMs achieving, systemic risks, or that they would, that we need to have some pre-deployment auditing of these systems. What is the sort of Japanese perspective on that?
Yes, so there are certainly some systemic risks that is possible. For example, like the impact on economy, or impact on education, or impact on democracy. There are certainly some risks, but we don't know about the amount and the volume of the risks, and we don't know about the upside of generative AI on those, education or democracy or economies. So far, I believe that we are not at the stage of, deciding regulation, whether they're regulating it or not. So rather, we prefer to identify and evaluate the risks in the society. And that's one of the reasons why Japan established AI Safety Institute under the government. And then your first question about how future regulation looks like. So what I, so let me make a short comment. So we have already developed a lot of ideas about how to regulate AI, such as outcome-based regulation or agile and multi-stakeholder approach, or need for third-party certification. And I think that approach is applicable to all other technology and sectors. So in other words, the new approaches, what used to be discussed as an AI regulation approach, should be expanded to the general regulation approach, because that is the future of a society. So our society is getting more complex, uncertain, and global. So, and AI regulation discussion has focused on those different risks and societal changes, but this is not caused only by AI. So AI is just a part of huge systems, and our regulation should look at more, dynamic and systemic risks in the entire system.
So may I complement a little bit? So in terms of the sector-specific regulation, so actually I am a member of the expert committee group appointed by Japanese government for making a proposal for the legal reformation, which is most suitable for automated driving system. And actually, I think the first step toward the agile and multi-sector approach is taken. So, for example, we recommend the government to set up the standard, which is previously actually they're made through their agency, the government agency by themselves. But now we recommend them to invite the stakeholders of their safety standard of the automated vehicles to set up more meaningful standards. That is the first point. The second point is actually we try to tie their safety standard to their reason for the liability rules, such as defect or negligence or something like that. And the third one is we set up the independent investigation group, which consists of the experts, scientific experts, to investigate the accident or undesirable affairs to collect the evidence or data, which tries to validate whether the object or subject of automated vehicle is actually matches the safety standard or not. And actually, this result is forward to the court and the prosecutors to decide legal liabilities. And after these kinds of the cycles, then according to the results of investigative bodies, then the multi-sector approach again try to revise the the safety standard of automated vehicles. So this is the kind of agile and iterative process to ameliorate the safety standard and try to avoid the unnecessary chilling effect to the companies, sometimes because the legal standards is very unpredictable for them, especially the court is not the specialist of the AI or some other cutting-edge technologies. And so we try to set up an agile iterative process, which is more, sensitive to the expert knowledge and the cutting-edge technologies. That is our approach.
Let me just ask that last point, a question related to that last point, which is the degree to which the Japanese government has the talent in-house to do that kind of iterative process of regulation with the companies. I mean, one of the things that we write about it's in Florence's giant report, as well as in the Digitalist papers, which some of you have come to those presentations, is how important, it's all well and good if you write these regulations, but unless you have the government capacity to actually enforce them, they're not going to be doing much. So how robust is the sort of the government approach here? Is the bureaucracy sizable enough to deal with all these sector-specific approaches or dealing with the large language models?
It's a very difficult question to answer.
Let me say in defense that we don't have it in the United States, right? We've got 15 people who work in the AI Safety Institute in the United States. That's how much. Europe, the UK has about 150 people in the UK Safety Institute. EU, it's sort of being built up right now. And so I was just sort of wondering in general what the enforcement infrastructure looks like in Japan.
Yeah, so as other countries, Japan is also facing the difficulties of getting more people on board in the government. And so traditionally, the Japanese bureaucrats used to be, from the law faculty or some economists, but not very much computer scientists.
Right.
Or tech people. So we're always trying to hire more people, but we are gradually making progress. And compared with, say, 5 years ago, now the government focus on digital industry has dramatically increased. So now we are very active on issuing more discussion papers, opinion papers, not only regulation, but also asking public, what do you think? And the situation is changing in a better way.
So we found the dramatical changes, for example, the other peoples in the digital agency. So before, actually, in Japanese officials are normally the bureaucrats. But now we set up some revolving door to encourage more, public-private corporations to setting up more sensitive regulations. And for example, as Hiroki mentioned, we try to establish, change the 10,000 analog the regulation to more tech the neutral one. And actually, I was a member of that committee. And what I saw is the diverse people is now working in digital agency compared to before. So we try to increase the capability of the digital agency or the other bureaucrats agency to capture or to catch up the rapid development of technologies. So that is the situation.
So let me ask this question, which is, to what degree is AI, the Japanese approach to AI, different than Japanese approach to tech generally? Like, is there, one thing that I think I'm hearing from you is that, look, this is just the next generation of technology, and that there's a Japanese approach to this, and we're not treating it as something distinct. And so one way to ask this question, we talked about this earlier, which is one concern I have in the United States and in Europe is that we are taking a mental map that we developed in the world of social media, and then we're trying to throw it on top of AI, and AI is a quite different kind of technology. And so the question I would ask is, how in the United States there's panic about social media. Do you see similar kinds of panic in Japan about that technology? And to what extent is the approach that you're taking sort of just building on tech approaches in the past versus treating AI as a kind of foundationally different technology?
Thank you so much for the very interesting question. So actually, I think that the attitude toward the AI is a little bit different from the previous technologies. Because as there appeared in the Hiroki's presentation and my presentation, we face the serious social problems, which is shrinking population and aged population, and we need more workforce. But maybe the Japanese people are not so, open to the immigrants so far. And so we need automated systems which may replace the human workforce in many places. And these kinds of the actual threat actually pushes Japanese government to change their attitude toward the AIs compared to other technologies. To some extent, we abandoned so-called zero-risk approach for the AI. I think these 20 years, actually, Japanese people try to avoid the risks as possible as they can. But now, they are more willing to take a risk to change and more profit from the AI. So that is, I think, the difference.
I think so. Are you talking about the social media panic like that?
Well, so just the larger question is, to what extent is AI seen as a kind of different technology than precedes it, so that requires a different approach? Or is this, the story that you're telling here is like, look, there's a Japanese approach to technology here, and this is sort of a continuation of that approach with the newest incarnation of widespread technology, in this case AI.
So, of course, when we first saw ChatGPT, everybody was like so surprised, and we immediately started talking about whether to regulate it or not.
Yeah.
And in February this year, the Liberal Democratic Party, which is a major party in Japan, issued a concept paper for regulating the foundation models. But now their traction is more like calm. I don't believe we are going to strongly regulate those kind of models because the risks and also upside are not yet very clear. And about the, for example, social media, of course, a part of the problems are from the AI, but we think that AI is just a part of a system and part of the cause of the risks. For example, let's think about it. So this year, on the first day of January, a heavy earthquake attacked Ishikawa prefecture, and a lot of people died. And so a lot of houses collapsed, and many people were under the collapsed buildings. So like people tweeted on the Twitter, X, saying that, hey, I'm under the building and my address is here. And thanks to that, a lot of people were saved. But there were a lot of fake posts on the address, and which is very bad because the resource of the rescue team will be taken to that fake post. And then the research team in Japan tracked where is a post from. And they figured out that most of the posts are actually from out of Japan. That is because there are people out of Japan, especially from the developing countries, they just wanted money. Because if you get a certain number of impressions, you can get money from X. So it's not a ethical problem, but it's also economic or ecosystem problem. And AI also, of course, supported the expression of the contents, but it's not only the problem. And also generative AI could make a fake content, but even the fake contents created by human beings could also spread. So we're trying to see the problems more systematically rather than just focusing on the mere technology of artificial intelligence.
Well, what is the sort of Japanese public opinion say about Facebook, Twitter, social media generally? Like right now, we're still experiencing a tech backlash in the United States that's been basically existed for 8 years or so. I think fueled by the 2016 election, but also, it's been exacerbated by concerns about the effects of social media on children, privacy, all those kinds of things. And that is not uniformly shared throughout the world. And I'm just interested in whether Japanese sort of perspectives on that technology, which is kind of like the big technological boom that precedes AI, is also quite different. Would you say? I mean, you have some different social media companies there that are not as prevalent here, but some that, like Twitter, that are prevalent there. What is the sort of general view in Japan?
Yeah. So the first thing I was surprised when I arrived here was that the most of the advertisement I saw on YouTube was about politics.
Right.
Yeah. And it is not, it doesn't happen in Japan because it is prohibited to make political advertisements on YouTube. So I understood that's why in the US, the political influence of social media is a big discussion. In Japan, rather than politics, the bigger problem is like disinformation or defamation, especially a lot of like some TV talents suicided because of a lot of bad posts on the social media. So we are now discussing to some extent regulating that kind of bad post. That is what happened in social media. And about the physical risks such as autonomous driving, the traditional industry, and we're still very risk adverse. So the autonomous driving is not as advanced as United States, California, but we are trying to be more flexible and open-minded.
Yeah, in terms of automated vehicles, actually we encourage them to change mind, and now they adapt not their risk approach, more risk taking approach, as I mentioned. And in terms of the SNS, so as Hiroki correctly mentioned, there's some cases, suicide cases, actually attracts the public attention. And we try to establish the new legal rules which try to regulate such kind of activities. So our approach is generally the case-specific or the risk-specific approach, not to generally, tackle to the abstract risks or something like that. So that is Japanese approach, I think.
I do think that, at least from my interactions there, that the perspective on social media is different than in the U.S. That it's a more favorable impression of how it's playing out. Yes, there are those specific regulations over politics, but that's true for television as well, right? It's a very different approach to that kind of regulation. We have some questions that come in on Zoom. Anyone else should also raise their hand. So I have a question from Neil Burnett. Or is there? Why don't we start in the room then? Yeah.
Japanese culture. Oh, thank you. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really resonated with what you said earlier about Japanese culture and this idea of interdependence. I think you see it a lot in AI innovation, but also in the space of sustainability, right? With Japan being a front runner in climate change initiatives. However, we've seen recently that AI takes a lot of energy, right? One search on ChatGPT is equivalent to about 10 Google searches in terms of energy. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to sustainable AI, what is Japanese governance and policy looking like around that? I know a lot of AI companies here in the States are looking towards nuclear power and energy. Is that a similar route that Japan's taking, or is there a different way that we're looking at, I guess, AI as it relates to climate sustainability solutions?
Okay, so unfortunately, I think as far as I understand, there is no, formal action taken by Japanese government on that problems. But actually, some companies, private companies, start to address such problems. That is actually using more, small LM models to correctly use to get the similar outputs of huge large language models. Because as far as I understand, according to these companies, the small and collective AI usage consumes less power, less electric, rather than the huge large language models. And so, from their viewpoint, this kind of technology is more sustainable and, in the end, more competitive. And so, they try to invest these technologies. So that is my knowledge. Thank you. Can you compliment?
Yeah, so this is a really difficult issue because when we think about, first of all, tech neutrality, is it really right to regulate only AI development or use to tackle with climate change? This is the first question. And also, who should be regulated is another question. I mean, is it developer or user? Well, what about if it is based on the open source model? So, I don't have a specific answer, but it's a really complex problem.
That actually leads into one of the questions we're getting over Zoom about open source models, and I'll make this the last question. Since there are no large language model companies in Japan, as far as I can tell, the importance of open source models for integration of LLMs and development of sort of knock-on LLMs, I think is going to be important in Japan. How is the Japanese government, how are scholars in Japan thinking about the importance of open source models or the risks that open source models might produce? This is from Neil Burnett, who sends it over Zoom.
Yeah, so I don't think there has been any official statement about the governance of open source models, but as far as I can guess, so first of all, you can always regulate the use of open source models. You can regulate the users. So, and about the developers, I mean, there is no specific developers of open source models, but perhaps you can say that, for example, we can provide the government procurement rules, which allows only certain kind of the AI system that got certain kind of third-party certification or audit to make sure that to leverage market power. Yeah.
Great.
So this is just the academic discussion, but some scholars try to argue that we may implement the dynamic automated contract system to make these kinds of open resource stakeholders to cooperate each other. So if we can, establish such kind of systems which actually, review the risk which each the developers increases, then which reflects on the prices or some damages or some other contract clauses. If we can have such kind of dynamic systems, then we may solve to some extent for example, coordination failure or the unreliable free riders problems or something like that. So that is only at the theoretical level, but we start to launch such kind of researches in Japan.
Great, thank you. We've run out of time, but those who have questions in the room, please come up right afterwards. Please join me in thanking our guests, Hiroki and Tatsuhiko.
Thank you.
I want to just make some announcements about next week. So on Monday, we will be officially releasing this gigantic tome that our guests were helpful in producing. And on Monday, we'll have a conversation with the EU consul, with a few other professors. Jacob Ward, formerly of NBC News, will be moderating that discussion. So please join us at 4 o'clock in the Philippines conference room in Encina Hall. It should be a great event. And then the next day, we're actually having Elizabeth Kelly here. Elizabeth Kelly is the head of the U.S. AI Safety Institute, and so we're thrilled that she's going to come here. It's only going to be a live event, so those of you on Zoom, you got to come and be live here so that we can fill this room up for her. But please come to all those events, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much.